Yo, what's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Celtics Chronicle. If you're new here, my name is Adam Taylor. I cover the Celtics for SB Nation, USA Today, and of course, the Celtics Chronicle newsletter. Links down in the description below. As usual, I'm joined by my homie, my compadre, my co-host in crime, Mr. Tim Shields. What's poppin', Tim?
Nothing much, man. I know you had soccer going on for England, but I know that's not really what we're here to talk about. But
I didn't have soccer going on. I don't give a damn about no soccer.
it's always funny. I'm the one who actually follows soccer.
Could not care. I
Yeah.
really couldn't care. So anyway, before we upset anyone coming in that's a huge soccer fan, today we're going to be looking at the Eastern Conference with power ranking the top five. So there's been a bunch of moves. We're going to go over all the moves the top five teams in the East made. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to power rank the top, the middle, and the bottom of each of the East and West. Obviously, we're starting with the top of the East because that's where the Celtics reside, baby. Before we get into that, Tim, how are you feeling about the moves that have been made? And we can go into this deeper team by team, but just in general, like how are you feeling about the landscape of the East right now?
In some ways, it's changed. In some ways, it hasn't. I think you've seen a couple different teams are sort of kind of figuring stuff out. Like Philly very much made some changes, brought in some key pieces that we'll get into. But there's a couple teams that I've seen sort of developing and moving up the rankings a little bit. And some teams that are clearly trying to keep pace with the Celtics overall. I think the landscape, there's a couple teams I think that have moved up a peg or two in the overall hierarchy in the East. There's at least one or two teams that kind of haven't done anything and they're still puttering in place. They haven't really made any major adjustments or moves, and that'll be something that we get into as we talk about the rest of the rankings of the East. But overall, I think it's a little bit stronger in the top three or four teams. But after the fifth spot, there's a really sharp drop off in my mind.
Yeah, so I've got it as like Celtics is the first seed, big gap or substantial gap. Team two, which we'll get into. I'm not going to give it all away at the top. Big gap, teams three, four, and five, right? So if we start off with team one, we'll look at what's happened with their free agency. We know who they chose in the draft. We'll have a discussion. We'll move on to team two and so forth. So when looking at team one, we've got the Celtics have re-signed Luke Cornett to a one-year deal, re-signed Quater to a multi-year deal, Tatum on a supermax, Tillman on a two-year deal, Derek White on a four-year extension. And then obviously they added Anton Watson and they added Baylor Shireman, who was the 30th pick. Watson was the 54th pick in the draft. I'm assuming Watson goes on to a two-way. Shireman will likely pick up a full-time contract and replace V. McCoyloo. So when we're looking at that and we're looking at where the Celtics are right now, given how dominant they were last season on both sides of the floor, this was a historic team, held I remember this stat because I've wrote about it so many times. So the Celtics held playoff opponents to under 100 points in 11 of 19 games. They played 19 games up from the opening game of the postseason to the final game of the NBA Finals, Game 5 against Dallas. 11 of those, they held teams to under 100 points. And they've re-signed all of that core. They've extended everybody they needed to extend. Everyone that needs to be kept around has been kept around. You've kind of replaced Svi, who I see as a single skill guy, with Baylor Shireman, who I've got a scouting report coming out for him tomorrow. Make sure you hit that link down below and subscribe to the Celtics Chronicle, who's a multi-skilled guy, can dribble a bit, can rebound, can score off the dribble, can score off the catch. So they've upgraded on the fringes and they've still got the open 15th roster spot, right? Which we did a video about last week if you want to go and check that out. So for me, I feel like the Celtics have firmly secured that one spot in terms of the best team in the East. And yes, Kristaps Porzingis is going to miss some time. He's injured. He's going to be recovering for a minute. But even without him, you've got plenty of depth at the five spot. There's five bigs under contract. And when he comes back, he's just going to elevate this team once he's back to fitness. So I'm super confident Celtics remain the best team in the East.
Yeah, I don't think they've really given you a reason not to, right? I going into the offseason, I thought there was going to be more issues with that rotation at the five spot because we really didn't know if they were going to be able to keep Xavier Tillman. Maybe there was going to be a bigger market for him. Luke Cornett, maybe he decides to cash in. The fact that Luke Cornett was the first domino to fall, and apparently Luke Cornett came out after and had been discussing with his agent that he wanted to be the first one to sign at the beginning of free agency, strictly just for the jokes, which was great. But I did not expect Cornet to just come back so quickly and immediately. It's awesome that they got him on a 1-year deal, and they'll be able to keep that big man core, like that big man rotation. Without Kristaps Porzingis, you've kept it together, which is huge. I mean, like, that's one of the biggest positions of needs without question going into the offseason was, hey, you're gonna be without Kristaps Porzingis for a little bit of time. Can you float by? And keeping that same core guys together is massive in a step towards that. And, we saw them do it in the postseason, being able to survive without Porzingis for ultimately almost virtually the entire playoffs. There wasn't really a ton of games that he ended up suiting up for them. And like, it's important to acknowledge that when you project what this team is doing. And you, for long-term goals, you've kept Tatum and Derek White and Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday all in these big extensions, and you extended KP when he got here. So they've solidified themselves firmly atop not only the NBA ladder, but the Eastern Conference without question. There's going to be a team or two or three this year that's going to try to take them off that throne, but they've given me no reason to suspect that they won't be in the mix. The biggest question mark is, when is Porzingis going to come back? And the fact is that they've got the personnel to withstand that absence.
The other piece of roster movement that we're likely to see, just to add this in there, is Sam Hauser will likely sign an extension in the coming weeks. I can't remember if it became extension eligible last Friday or it's the upcoming Friday, but around about now he's going to become extension eligible. I don't see him not signing when okay, he might have to take a bit of a discount, but this championship's on offer. Is at the beginning of his career. The more rings he can stack with his team, the stronger his negotiating power comes when he does want to hit an unrestricted free agency market. Obviously, they've got the season to figure this out. Maybe Baylor Scheinman's part insurance for Hauser there. But overall, I'm quite confident in the way this team are built, the way you said, definitely in the East, most likely in the NBA, they are still the best team, the deepest roster. There's we're live streaming this on Instagram as we speak. And we've got one question here. Considering how much Joe likes having 5-out spacing, how concerned are you with the lack of floor spaces amongst the big with KP out? I mean, that's a super fair question. Horford is and you have put other than Horford's a very reliable 3-point shooter. I think that Luke Cornett showed how the bigs on the Celtics roster can survive on the perimeter without being shooters. That's by being really willing screeners, really smart at when to slip the screen, when to short roll, when to roll hard towards the dunker spot and provide vertical space in there. You can screen and then go into veer actions where you set second screens and third screens. And then you can make a living of being that DHO handoff guy around the perimeter or on the elbow to help keep that spacing up at the perimeter. The Celtics use what's called the X5 slot, which is a term I coined off. I need to find his name on Twitter. I'll credit him in the description. But that's where you put a 5-man in the slot on the weak side to bring the big out of the paint because he has to defend in case the offensive big, the Celtics big decides to cut towards the rim or into the paint. So just by positioning your bigs on certain parts of the floor on the weak side and manipulating where the opposing defensive big is, you can still keep spacing without having a shooter there, especially if they're willing to move off ball in screening, rolling, short rolling, whatever it may be. So I'm very comfortable there. Solid question. No, I can't argue that question at all. So we move on. Celtics are number one. I feel like it was a given, right? There wasn't much to talk about there. This is a Celtics show, but it's the off season. Nice to know where everybody stands. That leads us on to, in my opinion, I think you agree, Tim, the New York Knicks. So if we go through what the Knicks have done during the offseason, Knicks have re-signed OG Anunoby to a 5-year deal. They've traded for Mikal Bridges from the Brooklyn Nets, added Keita Bates-Diop, lost Bojan Bogdanovic in that same deal for Bridges, lost Alec Burks, I can't even pronounce that name, lost Isaiah Hartenstein, and lost Shake Milton. I do apologize. It's Mamadi Diakite. I don't know. I'm really bad at pronouncing names. But I feel like Bridges was a huge addition to the Knicks. I feel like he rounds out their roster. They now have a very, very similar level of defensive versatility to what the Celtics do. They can switch every position. Everyone other than Jalen Brunson is a dog on defense. And they have enough wing defense, enough gap help where they can really cover for Brunson and they can put Brunson and hide him in places. But Brunson's still going to fight. Bridges also gives them another 3-and-D guy, so he can score off the bounce, he can score off the catch, he can attack closeouts. We saw what he was doing for Brooklyn. He was putting up numbers. He's moving into a team where, he came through college with a lot of these guys. He was with Brunson, DiVincenzo, Hart, all at Villanova. It's the Villanova Knicks now. I'm very confident Mitchell Robinson, if he can stay healthy, can have a strong season. They do, however, need to find a way to replace Hartenstein, right? There was some talk that they were looking at Walker Kessler, but Danny Ainge was like, "Yo, I want a first round pick," which in Danny Ainge talk means I need 2 first round picks. So maybe they struggled to replace Hartenstein. I think that's the one missing piece for them right now. But right this second, I have them comfortably at number 2 in the East.
And I think there's reason to keep them there. I think all of the moves that they've made have been to try and counter what the Celtics are going to throw out. I think the wing versatility is the biggest thing. Like you said, with Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, those are two very defensive minded players. Mikal Bridges obviously thrived in a lead spot with the Nets and was still very, very good with that Phoenix team that made the NBA Finals before. There was a reason why the Nets had been holding on to him in hopes that another team would come by and they would be able to flip him for assets. And let's be clear here, the Knicks cleared the cupboard to get Bridges. They really need to hope that this works because they put a lot of eggs in that basket. They made a really wise move in keeping Anunoby. Again, was a really, really treasured part of that Raptors franchise. And when they moved on from him, Knicks were made a really, really savvy move by going and getting him. But you start to look at those losses, and yeah, I think you hit it on the head there with Isaiah Hartenstein. I think that's the toughest one, especially because they've got Mitchell Robinson, who, if you look at the Celtics by comparison, a big man who is crucial to that team playing at their best level and is injury prone. So, like, it's a big factor in there. And Hartenstein got paid. He went out in free agency. He
Yeah,
got
earned it,
paid
man.
massively. And he earned it by really carving out a really important role with that Knicks team, especially in that postseason run. He was massive for that team's success. So it's tough. I think the Knicks have added so much versatility with these wings that they've got. Adding Mikal Bridges, yeah, you wonder what that starting lineup's going to be, especially if Mitchell Robinson's missing any time or anything like that. Do they go super small with Randall at the 5 and Mikal at the 4? Like, there's a lot of different options that they could have. And maybe going small is something that they end up doing with some frequency. Again, it's the versatility to be able to do both, right? Playing Randall at the 5 or Randall at the 4 with Mitchell at the 5. There's going to be little things that they can do. And if there's a coach that can get the most out of this unit defensively, it's Tibbs. But for the same reasons, I have concerns about the Knicks because of the physicality that Tibbs demands, the minutes that he puts these guys through. That would be my biggest concern from a Knicks standpoint is where is Mitchell Robinson's health? How do you replace those Isaiah Hartenstein minutes? And what kind of physical toll Tibbs is going to be taking on his own roster?
Yeah, and it's not just Robinson's health. Like you said, Anunoby missed time when he came, so Anunoby's health is going to be questionable. Brunson looked like he was running on like nubs on his legs.
And
He'd
hurt
been
and
warm.
hurt his hand by
Yeah,
the end of the playoffs.
so
Hart
his
got
health's
hurt
going to
too.
be questionable. Josh Hart. So it's not just Mitchell Robinson's health. Like Anunoby's a big question mark there. However, if they're healthy and they can find a serviceable big to plug and play off the bench, they're gonna be a tough team. They're gonna be a really tough team. They're designed to win now. They clearly feel like they're capable of winning now because they pushed all their chips in on the Mikal Bridges trade. They've not only reunited a core that won a college championship, and I know people made a lot out of that, and I don't while I think that's definitely a factor and maybe a subplot to this entire Knicks rebuilding scheme, for me, it's more just that group play Tom Thibodeau basketball. They play gritty, hard, in your face, we're gonna make you bleed basketball. And that's why Hartenstein was so good there. Like, I remember I did a podcast with Monica McNuck from ESPN a few months back, I should say. And I said to her, like, to me, Isaiah Hartenstein is the Severus Snape of the NBA. He's just the master of the dark arts because he's so physical. Like, you see him just like giving guys little body checks and little elbow hooks and stuff. I'm like, this dude has got the dark arts to a T. He should be in Hogwarts teaching motherfuckers how to do this shit. So they are gonna miss him, but I do. Do you not agree? You like,
No, it's just such a funny comparison that just like he's just like a wrestling heel. It's like New World Order over there.
yeah, dude, he was just super physical. Like watching him, like I could understand why Knicks fans loved him. And you know, when you talk about a player that, like, if he's on your team, you love him, and if he's not, you hate him. And that was kind of how I felt about Harden, right? But like, he deserved to get paid. He's going to add a lot of physicality to that Thunder team. He's going to toughen them up a little bit off the bench. It's good for them, and we'll talk about that when we get to the Western Conference top five. A little bit of a spoiler there. Oklahoma are in that top five. Don't know if you knew, but they are. Moving on, we're going to look at the Philadelphia 76ers down in the third spot. Tim, I've read the first two sets of moves, so I'm going to let you do the next set of moves. You ready?
I'm ready. So Philadelphia 76ers, two big re-signings that they had was Tyrese Maxey agreed to an extension, and they got Kelly Oubre to come back on a 2-year deal in free agency. The biggest addition, of course, is Paul George. They got him on a 4-year deal. Added Andre Drummond on a 2-year deal, Eric Gordon, Caleb Martin as well. I don't know if we've got the full details on Caleb Martin. And the big departures there, losing Mo Bamba, who was their backup, for Joel Embiid. They added Buddy Hield. On top of that, they lost Nick Batum and DeAndre
They lost
Melton.
Buddy Hield, did they?
They lost Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield ended up going to the Golden State Warriors. And what ended up being drawn out this crazy, and I think it was like a 16 trade with all of these different players moving
Melton
different
was part of
places.
that as well. Melton also.
Yeah.
And like, look, man, I'm a big DeAnthony Melton guy when he's healthy, right? Can play two-way basketball, great point of attack defender, very versatile on ball and off ball. He missed most of last season with a back injury. So for the Philly, they're not really losing much in Melton. Hield came over during the season, if I remember correctly, gave them some upside, and he might not have come. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But
I'll check.
yeah, check. Gave them some upside and some floor spacing, but now it's gone. And obviously, they're still upgrading because Paul George is there. They've added Andre Drummond to kind of give them some insurance for when, not if, when Embiid needs to miss some time. I have them third for a very specific reason. And I think it's a very fair reason. Philly fans might disagree. I'm not confident this team can stay healthy. Paul George played 70 games last season, just so happens to be a contract year, right? Every season leading up to that, so his other 4 years in Los Angeles, he'd played less than 55 games each regular season. He was only one of the seasons he played like 30 games. He is consistently not available. Consistently. It's very funny to me how players that are consistently not available suddenly have a bout of availability when a contract year comes around. You know, I'm not confident that Paul George and Joel Embiid can stay healthy for an entire season and an entire postseason run. One of those two guys is logically going to miss a significant amount of time. And if they do, this Sixers team isn't good enough to overcome the Knicks. It isn't good enough to overcome the Celtics. It probably isn't good enough to overcome the Pacers. They need Embiid and Paul George and Maxey all on the floor consistently, especially in the postseason, for them to be a threat. Now, if they can stay healthy, these dudes are a problem. Paul George is still Paul George. He's not PG-13 anymore, but he's still Paul George. Embiid is still an MVP level guy. He was putting up an MVP level season again last year before the meniscus injury. I'm just not sold, and I don't know why you would hitch your wagon as Daryl Morey to two guys that are perennially always out, always injured. They cost you more in medical treatment than they do in their ridiculous size contracts. That's how much they're on the treatment table. So I'm not 100% there.
And I don't blame you. I think, look, adding Paul George is an amazing add. And I think this is a team that very much needed another seasoned veteran. But with that seasoning, like you said, comes that injury history. I think getting Caleb Martin away from Miami was a big get. Eric Gordon still somehow in the league. You know, he's there, you know. I think losing Buddy Hield was a massive.
Daryl Morey himself. Like,
Daryl Morey, just like, you know, death, taxes, and bringing back every single member of the Rockets he possibly can every offseason.
He's like the Pied Piper of retirement home NBA guys at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy. But again, it's that Philly team has stink on it, and it has nothing to do with the moves that they've made. I think adding Caleb Martin was a great add. He's a 3-point shooter. Paul George, seasoned NBA player, very talented still at his age. Again, it comes down to availability. And it's the same issues that I have with Joel Embiid and the nature of basketball that he plays. What are they doing to flesh out the roster behind him? What are they doing to try and add to whatever is going to be going on at that center spot outside of Joel Embiid? Because they lost, Mo Bamba, which again, we looked at Mo Bamba as a potential option for the Celtics at one point. But the fact that Philly lost him is important. Like, you're talking about Joel Embiid, who, if you've seen any of the footage at all of the scrimmages for Team USA, doesn't look fantastic right now. He's moving, but he's not moving well. And he's one of those guys that, again, I worry about as the season goes on because they don't do enough to manage him, the way that he kind of plays, the way that he tries to draw contact, throws his body around. That leads to more injuries. And you're adding a aging Paul George to the equation. So you're really playing with fire there. Maybe they're banking on Tyrese Maxey to have another leap. And that's entirely in the cards. He's an amazing player, and they're smart to hitch their wagon to that guy. Now, I still don't know what's going to happen with Embiid's health, with his knee being the way it is, or Paul George coming in. Every single time we see a team go out and do this, there is that level of, is it going to work? Is it going to blow up in their face? It kind of feels like in the NBA, it tends to be one or the other. In the same reason that the Celtics going out and getting Kristaps Porzingis, on paper, it's a great fit, but is he going to be available? And they managed to navigate that as best as they could with managing the minutes. But the caveat there is that they had the rotational big men to supplement that. Yeah, to have the depth. And I just don't.
They also had positional versatility. You could slide your best wing, your best forward up to the 5.
Yeah.
Because he could create out of that position. Tatum, we're talking about here. Philly don't really have that. That's why I feel Drummond was a great pickup. He played really well for the Bulls last season when Vucevic went out injured. He's still he's okay. We mentioned this the other week. His basketball IQ is quite low in terms of making the right read on offense, but he's physical. He can rebound. He can score. He can give you some vertical spacing. He can screen real good. He's gonna be a valuable insurance to Embiid just for the physicality aspect that both of them bring. But as you said, they don't have the same depth as what Boston did. And as I said, you don't want to hitch your wagon to 2 guys that could or could not be there. Caleb Martin's a nice pickup. He doesn't move the needle if Paul George and Joel Embiid are injured. He doesn't move the needle. He's a good needle mover with those guys healthy. Without them, well, we just saw him not be able to help the Heat without Jimmy Butler. He's a high-level role player. He does what he's meant to do. But you need the stars available around him, and I'm just not sure that these guys will be available. Obviously, what you're saying is right. We've gave Paul George a 4-year deal. We've got Embiid tied down. We've got Maxey tied down. We only need these guys to be healthy 1 season in 4. If we can get a fully healthy, but the thing is, you need it to line up. It can't just be we had a healthy season after. You need Embiid and George lined up for a healthy season. But if you get that, you potentially win a championship. So it's a good dice roll, but at the same time,
it's a dice roll.
It's a dice roll, and it's a big dice roll too. It's across the whole motherfucking table.
Yeah, agreed.
Moving on, I'll let you take this one as well. So team number 4.
The Indiana Pacers, fresh off a conference finals appearance, re-signing Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin. Shout out Obi Toppin for having a career after the Knicks kind of sabotaged him a little bit there. Adding James Wiseman on a 2-year deal and losing Jalen Smith to free agency, going to the Chicago Bulls. So on paper, they haven't done a ton. The biggest things being keeping Pascal Siakam, adding him to the equation last year, adding him when they did, trying to make everything work. It's a very, very fascinating fit with that team, and they're so young. He's capable of shooting a 3. He plays defense hard. He rebounds. He has the championship pedigree, and he got it at a young age. So having him mesh into that core that they've got there in Indy is really, really cool to see. And it's interesting to just kind of see how they ended up playing out. Played way better than a lot of people expected them to, and they made a conference finals at the end of the day. Granted, it was a sweep, but in my mind, I thought that was a very, very hard-fought series and was extremely close. A lot of those games, again, all came down to clutch time and the Celtics just executing better. But adding James Wiseman, that's an interesting dice roll because I don't know what he brings to the table now. He's a young player who's obviously fallen out of good graces, never panned out to what he was supposed to be. Is there anything salvageable there? Is he going to have,
I
that
think
Phoenix moment,
I think this is the best fit for James Wiseman since he entered the NBA.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think he fit with the Warriors. The Warriors play a 5-out motion-based offense. They did not need a rim runner. That is not the type of big they needed. So they go to Detroit. Detroit had no spacing whatsoever. Everyone was an interior player, so everyone's just on each other's toes. They're running into it. It didn't work. The fit wasn't there. Now he's coming into a Pacers team with an elite. I'm not like Steve Kerr's an elite coach too. But with an elite coach in Rick Carlisle that play a high tempo, pace and space offense where there is a lot of threes being taken and there's room for Wiseman to be a rim runner, complete rim runner, end to end, lob threat, rebound, dunk it. Just play to your athleticism and your motor in the space that you need. He had the spacing with Golden State. He also had the pace. He just didn't have the same role where he could just rim run and the ball would find him around the rim. He'd rim run to offer vertical spacing, but never the ball never really found him because that wasn't the way the Warriors were set up to play. That is how the Pacers will use him. They will use him as a different look to Miles Turner, who is more of a perimeter-based big, to give them a battering ram. And even if he doesn't excel, like I'm not expecting him to be an all-star, I'm not expecting him to be an elite role player. I'm expecting him to show you that there's plenty of potential there. Biggs figure things out later in the NBA. The dude's 22 years old. He came into the league young. What I do like is the Pacers that keep taking dice rolls on these bigs that are falling out of grace. It was the same with Jalen
I
Smith.
was about to say it was the same thing with him when he came over from
And
the Suns. Yeah.
and he had a decent run. He will probably find himself on the back end of another NBA roster. I think Wiseman is a better talent. I think he has more NBA ready like physical trait than what Smith did. Smith was more of a 3-point shooting big, but he could just never translate the shot to the NBA range consistently, right? Outside of that, the Pacers haven't really added anyone, but they're banking on internal development. Tyrese Halliburton taking a step forward, Andrew Nemhard taking a step forward. Who else is going to take us there?
Siakam getting more comfortable.
Siakam. Mathurin was the name I was thinking of taking a step forward. They've got their young core in place. And now it's about internal development for them. They added their veteran piece when they traded for Siakam at the end, like midway through last season. I genuinely kind of have Indiana on the same level with Philly, just because Indiana are so young and they play a really unique brand of basketball, and they were like an otherworldly offense last season, right? So if Philly don't put it all together and they're struggling with injuries, yeah, I'll put Pacers at 3 happily. This team's good. They're going to be a tough out for whoever gets them in the postseason. They're going to have a good regular season. And if Halliburton takes another step forward in his development, because he's already ridiculous, and Siakam gets comfortable, look, this team's going to be a problem.
I trust them to be, in the mix again, just based on where this team is on their timeline. They're still so young. There's room for growth. They massively, outplayed expectations. And again, I think, the Knicks series was tough because the Knicks were beat up, and that's hard to kind of measure in terms of, hey, how good was this Pacers team against the Knicks, who were without a lot of key guys? In the same way that the Celtics, when they went against the Pacers without Halliburton, how do you gauge that? I still think that this Pacers team has another level to them. If they really start to commit on the defensive side and they continue that offensive output, they're going to be scary on both sides of the floor. And I think that they've got some versatility to them. I honestly have this team maybe a nose ahead of the 76ers only because I just don't trust the 76ers to stay healthy. There's just nothing about that team that makes me think they could stay healthy. And I think that this team in Indiana has the ability to take another step forward, just based simply on the fact of if everyone else just stayed status quo and Pascal Siakam gets another year in that system and continues to generate more chemistry and kind of mesh in with that, what they've already got established, I just think they're going to be a lot better of a team. And they still were a really, really good team last year. So I just think there's a lot of room for improvement just organically without making any kind of crazy additions or other splashes. That team's going to be really good.
I'm very high on the Pacers, to be quite honest. Very high. A team I'm not so high on, and I would have happily left them out of the top 5 if it weren't for the top 2 talent. is the Milwaukee Bucks. I waited to press the button there. Re-signing no one. Additions: Taurean Prince, Delon Wright. Departures: Malik Beasley. That's it for a team that's just been struggling for 2 straight years. That's not enough. Like, it's just not. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be mean. That is not enough. Like, you should be making some moves, and I get it. Like, you used all of your draft capital and your tradable capital to bring Damian Lillard to the team last year. So figure it out. Like, you were a first round exit again. You struggled throughout the regular season. The Dame and Giannis duo just didn't pop the way everybody expected it to. It needs to this year. They need to take that step and really figure things out. When you look at Chris Middleton's getting older. He's lost half a step in terms of his first step burst. So he's not getting past guys as quickly on that first step, which was a major point of his separation creation for when getting into the mid range and attacking closeouts. If he can't beat you on that first step, you do lose a little bit of potency in his offense. Brook Lopez is struggling hard now. Like, the dude rebuilt his game at one, like, he went from being a back to the basket guy to one of the best perimeter scoring bigs in the league, as well as being one of the best rim protectors. Milwaukee are apparently shopping him. Already report they'd take a first round pick for him. Okay, cool. Who's replacing him? How can you tell me you're a contending team when your best rim protector, who 2 years ago, 3 years ago, was one of the best rim protectors in the Eastern Conference, if not in the NBA, is leaving for one first round pick? What are we doing here? Are we rebuilding? Are we retooling? Or are you coming in to compete this season? Taurean Prince is a nice pickup. I like it. I like it a lot. Delon Wright is a nice pickup. I like it. They're not moving the needle. You need to address the Brook Lopez issue. If you don't think he's your big to win a championship with you this year, address that quickly. If you're convinced that Chris Middleton can still do what he needs to do as the third star, run it with him. If you're not, explore your options. I am quite okay with saying, no, I'm trying to word this without like sounding sorry. I'm quite okay with saying Milwaukee could be a top 5 team in the East, but they could also be a playing team if they don't figure things out. Now, playing team is probably a push, quite a big stretch, but
Mhm.
it's possible. Like, Giannis gets injured for a minute. Who else? Like, Dame played better without Giannis on the floor. That's a problem. All of Dame's big moments primarily, well, the majority of Dame's big moments primarily came when Giannis wasn't on the floor. If you can't get these guys to work together, admit it was a mistake and move on, figure it out. But right now, I'm not that high on Milwaukee, and I'm genuinely okay with putting Orlando ahead of them.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, and that's a combo we'll save for, another day in terms of Orlando, because we'll have to break down into their moves and their progressions. But I think the issue with Milwaukee is not necessarily what the roster is right now. It's the fact of what has happened or hasn't happened. There's no issue with what Milwaukee has in house. It's just kind of like, oh, so that's it, right? Like, this is what you're gonna trot out. You haven't made any massive changes. You've How many coaches have you guys gone through in the past 3 or 4 years? How many coaches are you paying to not coach your team right now? It's a lot. It's a
And then
lot.
you pick up Doc Rivers, who's a perennial second round exit coach
He came
outside
out
of
and
one season with the Seas.
was like, why are you doing this? And it's funny, and it's also just like mind boggling at the same time from a basketball perspective of,
Desperation.
okay, you added Dame Lillard, okay, right? Like, that was a really good move, but it comes with risk because of his age, because of the size of his contract. You're banking on him fitting perfectly with Giannis and with Middleton, and convinced with whatever's left in the cupboard after you go ahead and just sell the farm to go get Lillard, that you have enough left to win a championship or at least contend for one. And again, it's a first round exit?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's
like, you know,
like, sorry. Um,
no, you
just
could. I'm at a loss for words when it comes to Milwaukee.
you bring Dame over. Dame has been a ball dominant lead guard for the Trailblazers his entire career. He's never been a secondary star on a team. So then you bring him into Giannis's team. Dame came from being Dame's team. If he'd gone to Miami, it probably would have been Dame's team with Jimmy going into a secondary star role. But he didn't. He went to Milwaukee, where it was very clear that was Giannis's team. Like, you were going to join Giannis as Giannis's second option. But Dame's never really had to be that off-ball guy. right? So now he needs on ball reps to be effective. But Giannis is at his best when he's catching the ball and just driving the rim, right? When he's stampede cutting or he's posting guys up and overpowering them. So now there's a touches issue that you need to address. And that's a reason why last season, while they were figuring it out, Dame was better when Giannis was off the floor. Giannis was better when Dame was off the floor because they hadn't figured out where those touches come from and how to get the best out. Hopefully, an off season fixes that for their sake. Do you know what I mean? But if it doesn't, and if Middleton's not got that burst, he's not creating the separation that you need, or he's not catching and shooting quick enough, maybe that like the body mechanics are a split second slower than they used to be. You've got a problem, man. Another first round exit, they've got to blow this roster up.
Yeah, and I mean, they really don't have a lot of options in how to move forward because of how many picks they gave up. You know, you're putting a lot of pressure on Chris Middleton to be healthy and to be that,
Play
you know,
what 4 years.
secondary or tertiary guy. Yeah, like you're asking him to be a guy he was 4 years ago that he struggled to be in the first place. Like no one thought that Middleton was going to be that guy on a championship team to be, you know, that second or third fiddle. And now you're asking him to do it again in a situation where you don't have Drew Holiday anymore.
And
So
there's a
your
lot more
defense took him.
pressure.
There's so much more pressure, and you've taken a hit defensively because you traded away one of the best defensive guards in the team in the entire league, and he ended up on a team that you have to now go through in order to win a championship. So, like, you know, thanks Milwaukee for doing that. Thank you so much. It made all the difference in the world, believe me. But I just don't know how the Bucks can continue to run out this team and have the same issues and not really do anything to address them outside of just firing a coach and bringing in another one. Like there's something up there that they need to figure out, or it's just going to end up being the same thing again and again.
And with that, that is our top 5 in the East. We'll be back later in the week to do our mid-tier teams in the East, then our lower teams, then we'll move over to the Western Conference. We'll also be back to talk about Derek White heading to Team USA, Jalen Brown's tweet about that, or what we perceive that tweet to be about, you know, where we don't actually know what the media made it out to be, would probably be the best way of wording that. But that's for another day, most likely tomorrow. It's not tomorrow right now. So, with that being said, make sure you sign up to the Celtics Chronicle newsletter, links in the description. Subscribe to the show. Follow Tim on socials at Tim Shields NBA. I'm everywhere. Just put my name into whatever social media platform you use, except for TikTok. I'm not really there. And follow me there. Show me some love. Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed the new aesthetic. We took some time while we was away for a minute. We wanted to get the aesthetic looking good. Tim's the man behind all of that. Get him for all your graphic design needs. Tim, anything you want to say?
Cheers.
Peace.
Have a good one.